Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SAP Community Call. My name is Julia Rousseau, and I'm part of the SAP Community team. I'm your host during this call. Our topic of this session is how we develop a state-of-the-art SAP portal using UI5 and more, part 2, focusing on performance and backend. As always, this call is a recorded session and you will be able to access all replays of previous SAP community calls at community.sap.com under the events tab. And our speaker for this session is Christian Kralic, technical lead architect of SAP for Me. In this session, he will focus on what he did from a performance and backend perspective to build and operate a new state-of-the-art web portal for SAP. Now, before I hand over, I would like to make you aware of the Q&A button down below in your menu, where you can already raise questions during the presentation. And therefore, please do not choose the chat option to raise the questions. Afterwards, we'll reserve some time to answer as many questions as we can during this call. So, Christian, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Julia. So glad everybody joined. So this is part 2, as Julia already mentioned. Here you can see also a picture of me, or I'm also available via camera. So hey, everyone. I will try to focus on really technical talk because already in the first part, which we did, this was kind of very well received. So I will give you a very quick introduction into SAP for those of you who maybe don't know SAP for Me so far. Then we will really focus on most of technical talk, and I reserved quite a big portion of the time for Q&A. So please feel free to prepare and also ask any question you might have of what I'm going to show you today. As said, this is the second part of the series, so feel free to check out the first part where I talked most about how we developed the front end of SAP for Me, that we are using new technologies like SAP UI5 Evo and many other front-end technologies, also in the open source world of SAP. And now in the second part, as it was much requested in the first part, I wanted to talk mostly about how we achieved a very good performance for this new kind of web development, and also what we did from a backend perspective to enable SAP for Me, which is, I think, kind of interesting. So I am more than looking forward to today's presentation. We are also expecting to follow up these technical mini-series with more of a business series about SAP for Me. So what you are able to get out of SAP for Me. But in order to make a quick introduction into SAP for Me, we are building a new kind of customer portal, which is really much focused on the user experience, or the customer experience, as we call it. So we do build and operate. I'm the lead technical architect for the project. So I will be introducing you to most of the technical aspects today. But in order for you to follow and also know why we are taking so much care about this, I would want to have our chief product owner, Jürgen Jakowski, introduce you to our solution, so you get a general idea of what we built and what we are talking about today. So I will share a about 2-minute video, and after that we'll continue with my presentation.
SAP for Me aggregates relevant alerts, metrics, and insights from your SAP product portfolio into one single access point. Start your journey at mesap.com, our website that always includes the latest information about SAP for Me. If you log on for the first time, the user onboarding will help you to initially personalize your settings and maximize your SAP for Me experience. The Intelligent Home area is at the heart of SAP for Me. Based on your preferences, it provides functions, metrics, and more, everything tailored to your needs. The Intelligent Home will evolve over time and will become even much smarter. It will make you aware of certain situations and will proactively guide you to solve it. Coming from your Intelligent Home, the product detail page contains a variety of context-driven information that give you a quick and comprehensive overview of your product. From there, you can also examine different perspectives like your systems, licenses, orders or additional information. Everything in one single access point. Now it's your turn. Just visit our website at me.sap.com. Get familiar with SAP for Me, and if you like, give us feedback. We look forward to hearing from you.
Good. So with that, as Jürgen already told, we kind of have a very easy URL to remember. So please feel free to check us out. And I think this was necessary to set the stage where why we are taking so much consideration in this. We really want to build a great customer experience with this. We are much focused about new technologies to really deliver you a very pleasant user experience. And with that, I would like to jump into my first topic, which is the performance. So in my first session, I showed you how we do build a kind of a modern UI experience. And now out of the last call, there were essentially many questions. How did we achieve the kind of performance you see on our page? What have we done in order to improve it? And this is where I would like to start off with a small demo. So let me switch to SAP for Me, and I'm going to do two things you commonly don't see one who is giving a demo about performance doing. On the one hand side, I'm going to open a new private browsing tab, which for those of you who are technically into the topic would know, okay, private browsing doesn't share any browser caches with the normal browsing window. And I'm also going to open the network tools in Chrome. And as you can see, I'm also purposefully disabling the cache. So this is the first thing you normally don't see in a performance oriented talk, because everything is staged and local on your PC. Because the second thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to visit a website, which is the SAP for Me website, on the internet. So I really hope my internet provider doesn't fail me on this. So this is kind of always the test for my internet connection. So I'm really going to show this to you with a clean cache on a live website, just to introduce you to the performance we are about to be expecting. I will be starting the SAP for Me front end in what is called a bootstrap test mode, which means I'm going to not now measure all the backend performance and everything else. It's really about a reproducible test for all the front end assets. So just be aware of that. You will just see the SAP for Me front end application loading up without any external dependencies or such. And I just want to introduce you to the performance and the optimizations we did in order to achieve that. So if I open this in the bootstrap test mode, you are seeing the SAP for Me framework booting up. We are ending up in this kind of maintenance screen, because all I want to show to you is this right here. We have a clean cache time now. Okay, this was better if I'm not sharing and recording and whatever I do all the time. Normally, we can expect even up to under 1 second of a boot time, but I think even for such a SAP UI5 application, having a DOM content load time of nearly a second is already a very great result. And if I'm also hiding all the data URL requests, you see we have a very optimized bootstrap. So all the UI5 assets are loading in only 4 resource files. All of our CSS is loading in only 1 resource file, and it's all loading in essentially just a couple of milliseconds of time. So this is part of the optimization which we did. And even if I load it without this bootstrap test mode, at least on our try me page, you see the response of this. As said, again, I still have the disable cache here on. So essentially everything is loaded directly from the server. I think for a SAP UI5 application, everything you see is very, very snappy and responsive. So this is what we essentially have in place right now. And I will focus in the first part of my presentation how we actually achieve this. So I will switch back to the presentation. And yeah, so going down the rabbit hole of performance, how I called this slide, is essentially always something that requires very much effort and very much dedication to look into. So I will just go through some of the major things which we have done to really optimize our performance, and I will be glad to be answering some questions if there are any after the call. So first thing first, what you just saw, the SAP UI5 application is a so-called SAP UI5 evolution application, which means we are using kind of the latest derivative of Open UI5 in that manner. And Open UI5 has very much invested into very diligent performance optimization over the past years. Everything in SAP UI5 is meanwhile asynchronous, so loaded without blocking any rendering or network threads. And you saw this. If the page loads up, it's immediately responsive. Users can directly visit it. And if you develop in your Open UI5, you really have to take care to no synchronous HTTP calls, to not block any of the rendering or network threads. And SAP UI5 meanwhile really has the capability of doing so. So really great performance improvements over the past years, and we, so to speak, piggybanked on these, set our new framework on top of SAP UI5 evolution, done all the network part in asynchronous mode, and this is the performance you will be able to get out of it. SAP UI5 also, meanwhile, or Open UI5 in that manner, meanwhile also comes with a lot of open source and new build tooling, which means what we did in order to really optimize the experience, we used everything the UI5 team has given us from a performance optimization point of view. As you saw in my demo, multiple Bootstrap files are loaded in parallel, because this is a point I will come to in my last bullet point. Browsers commonly have about 6 network threads at the moment. So our JavaScript, our CSS files are splitted into multiple files. So they are really quick to load by the browser. We do optimize and minify all of our assets which we deliver to a customer, and we added this with custom build tooling to our project. And all the custom build tooling we used, like Gulp as a task runner, Minify.js, Minify XML, and stuff like that, which we really use to shrink down the files from the original size into something much smaller, is all open source meanwhile. So there is essentially no proprietary tools any longer used for the SAP for Me development. Everything you just saw, you can achieve with everything UI5 development, but also other open source community members have provided you. So for instance, also the image you saw in my demo was a SVG file, and there are open source SVG optimization tools online. You can simply essentially plug and play into your build process in order to minify them. And what I meant with going down the rabbit hole is really that it's highly dependent on the project you are working on, what kind of optimizations you need to do, especially for this step, right? Because every project has kind of different assets, kind of different structure to maybe optimize. So really being able to plug and play together different open source components to do this optimization is really a trait or a thing that is recently coming up, and really a great help if you want to optimize the loading performance. Fake it until you make it. It's a little bit of thing where I want to go into the description of perceived loading optimizations. So what you saw in my demo was that when SAP for Me loaded up, you first saw a little splash screen. Afterwards, it went into what is called a skeleton loading animation. So you saw the text of that for me, but it was grayed out until fully loaded. You saw this little loading animation for the cards. So this all contributes towards loading optimizations to do, which do not really improve the loading time from a technical point of view, but simply the perceived loading time, that what the user notices is simply much smaller if he doesn't see just a blank page for whatever 2 seconds or 3 seconds, and then the whole page suddenly pops up. It's a, so to speak, a gradual transition. It's like seeing a loading bar previously just gave you an indication that something was going on. Now there are modern technologies and modern ways of so to speak, reducing the perceived loading time by showing something like skeletons. It's a much less interruptive way of telling the user, hey, something is expected to come up at exactly that place. So until the user, so to speak, recognize that in his head, by perceiving it, hopefully the loaded data is already present and will be displayed to you. Going for the last mile and digging deep are essentially also saying, yeah, I mean, it's like for every IT project, essentially, hitting the 90–80% mark in terms of optimization can be achieved pretty quickly. I guarantee you, if you are switching to the latest Open UI5 release, if you are switching to this new SAP UI5 evolution releases, you will immediately see a performance improvement of your website without doing any optimization at all. But then to really get out the last second, getting a sub-second bootstrap as we now achieved, if I'm not recording and doing everything else, really takes you down to optimizing the infrastructure components, like going for Akamai, for example, to deliver the static assets, but also digging more deep into something like network thread optimization of the browsers, FAF icon optimization, because this also blocks the network thread and stuff like that. So if you really want to achieve the maximum, it really takes the last 20%, I would say, to achieve, take as much time as the first 80%. This is really true. So this is just a small extension of my first part of the community calls, because I thought this would be kind of interesting to see for many people what we really did to optimize this. I can also recommend you to check out a blog article, which I'm going to write about that in your future. So please stay tuned for that, where we'll go into detail also on a technical level, what we did and how we did it. With that, I would like to really also focus on one more aspect of the SAP for me architecture, which I think is kind of cool and kind of goes into a new direction from what SAP previously did for their portals, and also in regards to very modern technology, which is our approach of the backend. So as you might imagine, if we are speaking about a portal of SAP, there are two parts of it. For sure, developing the portal, the visual part, which you see, but the data needs to be retrieved from somewhere. There needs to be some data processing, authorization checks, and everything performed on a layer which is capable of performing this for a very large amount of customers. So we went really also here in a very modern and new direction, and I would like to introduce you to the world again of open source and cloud native development. And I know cloud native is something not again a buzzword here in this call, and he's going to talk about something which anyways is not done. But yeah, I just want to maybe open you this kind of bucket like this, especially for those of you who might be with technology for quite some time. I mean, I started at SAP, where we developed the SAP Service Marketplace and the SAP One Support Launchpad then afterwards. And I mean, when I started, whatever, 15 years ago, we are now building very complex systems with ever-growing complexity. We host them on a cloud, on some kind of virtualized hardware, and all of what you see on SAP for me, or really most of the parts of what you see, is really based on open source components which are completely free of charge. So that is what always amazes me, that 10 years ago from now, or even 15 years ago from now, this was unthinkable, right? Because every company essentially just created his small part, his small and proprietary technology. And if you wanted to use this, you had to pay a lot of money to get onboarded to the platform and use it. Meanwhile, it's really possible to build a very complex system with open source technology, which is freely distributed. And yeah, this is kind of amazing to me. And this is what we heavily use in the SAP for me development. And I will come to some details in a second. Now, what is the downside of it, right? So this sounds all pretty and good, but yeah, now what is the challenge then if everything is essentially freely available on the market? Well, yeah, the technologies and kind of the solutions, the frameworks to use are available, but sure, well, the knowledge and the learning, choosing and connecting the dots between these different technologies cannot be neglected. This is something which, sure, you need the subject matter experts, you need the right architects, developers to really leverage this kind of technology. And yeah, as it's always, that kind of resources can't be freely available. As an upside, however, most of the documentation of the open source is really, really good, and you will be able to really jump to it, but you have to be open for this kind of new technology development. So the backend, which was, as I said, mostly focused towards data consolidation, connecting to different kind of backend systems, showing you the information we wanted you to show on SAP for me in kind of a very easy and understandable manner, was created using open source technology. We opted in for a open source framework, which is most commonly also used meanwhile in the IoT side of things. So companies like Bosch and others are using a framework called Vertex. What makes Vertex different than, for instance, other comparable frameworks than Spring or even Java servlets? Vertex is a very new and modern framework which is built on what is called an event loop principle, which means instead of really having threads which run and block when you do, for instance, a web request to a backend system, like what was our use case essentially, Vertex has this kind of a concept of an event loop where whenever something is done on an asynchronous manner, this task is put out of the event loop and in again, not consuming any additional resources. So we really took the Vertex framework as kind of our foundation. So this is where all the web requests happen. This is what we use to do to structure our work, which we essentially need to do. And we base the SAP for Me framework on top of Vertex. As said, a completely open source component, freely available, great documentation, and a framework which you will, if you will use it, will simply perform much, much better than many of the proprietary solutions out there, and also many of the classical solutions that were maybe around years ago, like Java servlets or Spring Boot, which are kind of very heavy and old school frameworks. So this is where we put the business logic, our data model you can see on SAP for Me onto. But, and this is now a very happy part about this story, we also wanted to contribute back to the community. So instead of really just using Vertex, we decided to also develop a smaller framework on our own, which is based on Vertex, which others might want to use in future. Because as I said before, our task was to consolidate data out of different backend systems. We wanted to have a unified interface to our SAP for Me front-end framework. And instead of simply now again building a proprietary framework, which is closed source at SAP, we wanted to essentially provide something back to the open source community, and we wanted to create an own framework based on Vertex, which can perform these tasks. So our framework essentially is used to define the models, define the interface, provide certain kind of web service capabilities, map data from backend systems to the front-end system into a very modern OData v4 standard. And this is provided to us now open source. We are about to release this very, very soon. And yeah, why did we do that in the first place? You might ask yourself, right? It's like we could have developed SAP for Me closed source and everything on our own and not give back to the community. But I just listed 4 points why we decided to really go for this kind of open source approach. It is on the one hand side for a good cause, right? We are taking so much out of the open source community, like Open UI5, like all the build optimizations I just shown you, like we are taking a whole backend infrastructure, a backend server out of the open source community. So why not give back also parts of what we develop? And by the way, I haven't mentioned the name. So our framework we decided to call NeonB, which is kind of a new way to develop these kinds of highly distributed data processing systems. So NeonB, the name it is, and we decided to also, maybe we will get help along the way, right? We develop an open source component. For now, we at SAP for Me develop this open source component because we see the need for our project, but I'm more than sure that also others have the need of consolidating data and do essentially the same thing that we do. So we really wanted to bring that back and contribute it back to the open source community. Maybe also further traits, which if you are thinking, should I start an open source development? So for us, one of the big factors, and I will go back to this picture, was we started with this. We started to base the SAP for Me framework on the Vertex framework. And then it was like, okay, now we found a bug and we weren't sure, is the bug caused by us? Is it a bug which was caused by the Vertex foundation framework? Now it was very hard to communicate because when we went back to the Vertex community, they were super helpful. So they were really like, okay, let's look into this. Could you send me over some of the stuff you have been working on? And we were going like, yeah, it's kind of a closed development we do on SAP side, so we can't really share the experience with you. And we can just try to replicate it onto your framework, but the communication was always kind of hard. Now that we decided to, so to speak, have this open source layer in the middle, it's now very easy to communicate with also other open source developers because we simply go like, here's the problem we see in our open source framework. Could you please have a look, try to help us? And they are very open to be helping us with our problems which we face in terms of scaling, in terms of really bugs that we maybe find in the Vertex framework, and so on and so forth. So it's a very much easier communication back to the open source community. Another benefit of going open source is really that we also in our team have a very steep incline, or we want to produce good, well-documented code, which with a good architecture, because we always have in the back of our heads, hey, this goes open source and will be maybe reused by the community for other purpose. So simply as you know it, if you do a development yourself and it's closed source, it's just for your purpose, you go like, let's put in a workaround here, let's put in a workaround there maybe, because it will anyways only be used and maintained by me. If you go in with this open source thinking, you will immediately start making more your mind up about how should I name this? Where's documentation and what should I do? Should I expose this kind of functionality in general to everyone else, or should I keep it closed because it's not intended to be used by anybody else? So you will immediately have a higher code quality and a better architecture simply by having in the back of your mind, like, it is going open source. And last but not least, in the end, developing open source is also kind of fun and opens this whole new world of open source. And maybe I should have called this presentation ode to open source because that is what it essentially is. So it's really like nowadays, it's really awesome what you can get out of open source if you open your mind, open your interest for this kind of ecosystem. You will really get much out of it. And I can only encourage everyone who maybe not yet had looked into this whole open source ecosphere to really take a look at it, there are tools out there which 15 years from now were only available for a very high price or from very specialized people. And with open source components, you can really, really achieve much today, which wasn't able before previously. So with that, I would really like to, again, just make a little bit of an advertisement. So as said, we are currently in the process of open sourcing this NeonB framework I was talking about. So please check out neonb.io. And we are currently about to open sourcing. So all of the source will be available on GitHub in near future. And we are talking about the next 1 or 1.5 months, where we really want to push the whole coding which we did for the SAP for Me framework in regards to NeonB also to this open source platform. And you will find all the necessary documentation and information about this on our homepage very, very soon. And with that, I would like to, as said, close the call and open the round for any questions. Also, please feel free to reach out to me personally whenever you have any detailed questions of what I've shown you. And as said, I think, yeah, last time the questions were very interesting. And I think both in regards to the performance optimization, but also in the open source part, I'm more than welcome to answer the questions. And again,
Perfect.
yeah, thanks. I will hand over to Julia because I think you have to again remind everyone to use the Q&A panel, right?
No, I didn't want to interrupt you here. I just wanted to say thank you very much, Christian, for your awesome and insightful presentation. As you just mentioned, we will open the Q&A part now. So feel free to ask your questions in your Q&A section in the menu down below. Or if you raise your hand, I can also unmute you and you can ask your question directly. So, and I saw we already have one question here. I'm going to read the question. So how is this related to SCP? I was expected to see some spaces, Kubernetes, etc., and use of CAP development. Is CAP used under the hood?
Very good question, and I can talk, I think, a whole session about this. So yeah, so essentially the parts I talked about, the SAP for Me frontend, the SAP for Me backend, as of today are really hosted on SAP Cloud Platform, Cloud Foundry in that manner. So we have 2 derivatives available, as you know, or soon 3, which is Cloud Platform, Cloud Foundry, Cloud Platform Neo. We decided to really operate and host our front-end framework on and also our backend framework at the moment on Kubernetes. On Cloud Foundry, I'm sorry, the backend framework is also possible to be hosted on Kubernetes. This is something we are just looking into as of right now. But essentially, as we are using really open source technology here, we are using Java for our backend, we are using Open UI5 for our front end, we are using Node.js as a small backend layer to communicate between front end and backend. And all of this is simply able to be hosted on Cloud Foundry very easily because there are build packs available by Cloud Foundry. So the only thing we do essentially in order to really execute this on Cloud Foundry is putting it to a folder, adding a small manifest file and pushing it to Cloud Foundry. So there is really not so much to show you because it's essentially just putting everything in a folder, uploading it to Cloud Foundry. And this is what I said with open source and cloud is essentially a perfect match because if you develop open source, Cloud Foundry is also kind of an open source platform because the standard of Cloud Foundry is open source. So if you develop in this open source realm, it will simply work because there is no hidden magic somewhere where we rely on SAP proprietary technology. It's like we are using SAP Cloud Platform to really host our application, but we could host our application, and this is also the intention of NeonB, to be hosted somewhere else. And in the NeonB framework, we are having a layer where we abstract from the cloud which it runs on. So our application or NeonB knows, yeah, I'm now running on Cloud Foundry. And this is also what we, so to speak, give you out of the box if you open or host it in NeonB, is that it can run, for instance, on Cloud Foundry, but soon, as said, also on Kubernetes. And CUP, so the CUP development model, CUP is used for, and we are in really close collaboration with the CUP team on our end. And if I go back to this slide where I showed you what, so to speak, our NeonB framework is able to do, you also saw the data model part up here. So what we based on the whole CUP development model is how we define our data models, which means our whole front-end server is using OData v4, and in order to parse and interact with OData v4, we are using what is called CDS, which is a model definition language of SAP, and open one as well. So also here, open source again. And this is what we have, so to speak, as a foundation. So we are using CUP to parse these CDS files and provide the OData v4 interface to our front end. And this is also built into NeonB. And with NeonB, this is another, so to speak, just advertising. We are really implemented a completely asynchronous OData v4 interface in Java, which also wasn't possible before. So yes, you can use CUP, you can use your existing CDS models, you can import them in NeonB, and you will get a valid OData v4 interface out of it. So hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Christian, so much for answering this question. We received another one in the chat. So it's from Haifan Zhang. SAP for me will be introduced as a service on SAP BTP, sorry.
So SAP for me, and I think this was a question more towards my introduction, is a service or a portal you can use immediately. So there is no kind of ramp up needed in order to be really using SAP for me. So feel free to just go to me.sap.com, log on with your S user at the moment. We will soon be also introducing SAP Universal ID to log on with your email address. But for now, so there is no subscription, no additional contract needed with SAP. It's really like everyone who has an S user, who has a valid contract with SAP today, can visit SAP for me and get the insight into the customer information. So there is no buying, setup, or anything needed. It's a public website you can visit.
Okay, awesome. Do we have any more questions here? Otherwise, I would like to start a poll. It's a poll about this call. So I think we have no more questions coming in. So that's why I would like to ask you to be part of the poll section here. So I'm going to launch it. You must see the poll right now. It would be awesome if you would participate here. Awesome. So thank you very much for participating this call. I wish you a very good day. And thank you very much for joining this call. The recording will be uploaded afterwards on our community call page. The link is in the chat. So thank you very much, Christian, for the presentation, and have a great rest of the day.
So much and very welcome.